So we're out here riding up Stevens Canyon Road, and there's Stevens Creek flowing down there. This is what's known as a speleothem. You can see how the water has come down over the rocks, and it's producing, like, if this were underground, these would be stalactites and flowstone, but it's an above ground feature, and when it's above ground they just call it by the generic name Speleothem. And then there's a spring up above where the groundwater comes out, and the groundwater's percolated through all the limestone of the Franciscan Formation, and when it comes out it's cold water, but it's loaded with calcium carbonate limestone, and when it drips off it evaporates and leaves these deposits. Yeah, anyway, you can see there's a whole bunch of the deposits here, and yeah, even though it's end of September, it's still wet up there. There's still water dripping. It's not flowing real heavy, but yeah, you can see all this white here is all travertine. So this is just like up farther in the canyon along Waterwheel Creek. You have the same thing in the creek bed is travertine deposits. This is rather uncommon to have an above ground speleothem. You see these like in Yellowstone Park. There's the hot springs have this stuff, but to have this with cold water is rather unique. Yeah, I think this is the better view of the speleothem. So you can see there's even water coming down this side here. That's coming from way up at the top there. There's kind of almost a little cave in there. And then usually in the spring and early summer, water's coming down this face too. It's dry now, so you get more of the whitish color of the rock showing through. Where it's wet, you get all this moss. And that's why I really didn't notice this at the time, because it never looked really white. So let's go over here. I've got my bike parked. Finally found this parking spot was not occupied. There's usually people here down in the creek, but I found it was vacant today, so I grabbed it. And I want to see if we can get up the side of it. I think there's a little trail there. Okay, yeah, there's the road down there. There's a really steep trail that comes up here and around here through the poison oak. A little bit sketchy there. But I was thinking there'd probably be something like a cave up here. There's a real small opening, and that's where the water's coming out of. And it looks like it's even coming out of this rock here, so there must be an impermeable layer of rock down here, and all the water percolating through the limestone comes out here. Some sort of algae or something. That dark brown color is probably some sort of algae growing in there. And it comes right over here, and then that flows off the edge here. It's actually going over the edge from the top here, and then that's what drips down. Right here, this rock layer here must be the impermeable layer. And so the water is coming out here and then running down, and then they have this brown colored algae, and then over farther, I guess where it gets some light, you get the more greenish color. So for me, there's a interesting story about this. I'd been riding up this canyon for probably 6 or 7 years, and riding by this spot, I knew about this location here. I didn't know what it was, but I always was aware of it because on the inside of this turn here, all of this water is always running down into the ditch, and any cars coming down the hill, if they cut that corner, they'll splash into the ditch. There's usually a puddle there, and it'll splash muddy water out on the road. And so when you're coming down the hill on your bike, I always would slow down at this corner. If a car had just splashed water on the road, it's going to be wet and muddy. And then once that dries up, there's all this fine silt and sand. So even though it's dry, it's very slippery. So this is one of the corners on the canyon road that I always slow down for, because you don't know what's around this corner. I was aware of it because of that slippery spot. So back in 2018, when I figured out how to do geocaching on the bike, I had found a couple of geocaches, one up the road a ways, and I had a faint signal for that one. And then I figured out how to do what's called offline geocaching. There's a bunch of geocaches that I found way up past the gate at the end of the road. And then there's a whole bunch of geocaches down around the reservoir and up in some of the parks. There's a county park and an open space preserve. So I had found those, and those are easy because you've got mobile data connection. But up in the canyon here, mostly you don't. And there's this one geocache just up here, about a half a mile from here. Yeah, so this one geocache was kind of in between the caches I knew were offline and I had loaded in a bookmark list. And then the caches down the canyon, I had data, so I didn't worry about saving those. But one day I was looking, and this cache up here, well, I'll stop up there on the way up the canyon and show you that. I'd always missed that cache because it's not accessible offline. You have to have stored the geocache data before you went out. And so one day I happened to see that on the geocaching app, and I remembered, oh yeah, I need to stop and look at it. Yeah, so I forget exactly what happened, but I had bookmarked it, saved it in my bookmark list, but I forgot to upload it to my mobile device. But I remembered the description, and the description was, go to the turn here at the bottom of the canyon, and I think it said ride 8/10 of a mile up the canyon, and then it said something about a guardrail. So I just had remembered that, so I rode 8/10 of a mile on the bike GPS, and then there's a guardrail. But that geocache is called Speleothem, and it talked about this here, but it didn't say where this was. So let's go up to that cache, and then I'll tell you the next point in the story. That was the beginning of the story. There's another part of the story that starts at that cache and goes farther up the canyon here, so stay tuned for that.